It is Southeastern 16 as we are going to preview the Vanderbilt Commodores heading into the 2024 season. I'm Chase Robinson with Chris Lee. We are glad you are joining us as we're previewing all 16 SEC teams getting ready for this season. And before we dive into the Commodores, let's remind you about Bet Online, your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC and MMA and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino. Play a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of the over 150 slots games. Head over to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. That is promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV. Bet online. The game starts here. So, Chris, when it comes to the Vanderbilt Commodores, obviously just 2 wins last season. They came in the first 2 games, 10-game losing streak. We knew changes had to be made for Vanderbilt in the offseason. And that's what Clark Lee did. Changes to his staff, changes in personnel on the field. They lost all 3 quarterbacks that took a snap. So they had to go out and get some guys. And I don't think Clark Lee would be wise to show his face in Las Cruces, New Mexico, because he rated the Aggies out there, staff and players. But just what do you make of what Clark Lee, his kind of his mission was in the offseason?
Well, let's go back to the end of things 2 years ago. Coming off a rough season in year one, Clark Lee had Vanderbilt getting wins against Kentucky and Florida in November, both double-digit underdog upsets. And it felt like the program was moving in the right direction, but the way he had built the program was based on let's recruit and develop kids. Well, that's all fine and good if you've got a really solid NIL program in place. But Vanderbilt did not. Other teams have come and taken the top off their roster. I think they realized that last year, number one, that they had to get more competitive in the NIL space. I think they made a lot of progress in that. I would guess they are still last or one of the last 2 or 3 schools in the SEC in that department. But I think the gap between what was a virtually non-existent NIL program and where they are now has closed a lot. That's number one. I think number two, they realized they had to change philosophically. They changed both coordinators. They changed their strength and conditioning coach. I think you will especially see philosophical changes on offense, which we'll get into in a moment. Look, that's a lot of change. I think it was things that Clark Lee had to do. I think those things were painful, but we'll see how that all meshes coming into what I think might be a little bit more interesting 2024 season than people expect. Look, is Vanderbilt still going to be at the bottom of the league? Yeah. But I think there's a chance for a few more wins than maybe you saw the Commodores get a year ago. We'll see how that plays out.
So let's start on the offensive side of the ball and mention the quarterback situation. Well, they've brought in a couple of quarterbacks. Diego Pavia, we mentioned the Raid of New Mexico State. He is a former Aggie there. And then you got Nate Johnson, Utah transfer, coming in, and those two seem to be who will be battling it out to take the snaps there.
Yeah, one thing that Clark Lee figured out is that when they beat Kentucky and Florida 2 years ago, they did it with Mike Wright, who couldn't throw very well, but man, that kid could run. And so what they did is they reset the entire quarterback room. Every kid that played a snap for them a year ago is gone. And they have reset it with Diego Pavia from New Mexico State and Nate Johnson from Utah. Now, one common denominator for these kids is both can run. Johnson averaged 4.4 yards a carry, which is less than Pavia's 5.2 a year ago. But Johnson actually the faster guy. Actually 4.0 yards a carry, I think. But I think he's a 10, 400-meter guy, something like that. So I think even maybe faster than Mike Wright. Now, the question for him is throwing. Pavia answered that a little bit better last year, 8.1 yards per throw. Of course, he was the guy that led New Mexico State to an upset at Auburn. Tough dude, was a JUCO guy, and I would presume he will be the guy running the system in the fall. We're doing this mid-July as his offensive coordinator, Tim Beck, is now his coordinator at Vanderbilt. Jerry Kill, his head coach, is now a head offensive analyst and will be taking an on-field role with the new NCAA rules. So I think the quarterback room is going to be key to the transformation that Clark Lea has tried to achieve with his roster and his philosophy for 2024.
Yeah, and going off of quarterback is skill guys, and I know they lost quite a bit the wide receiver room. Looking at their roster, they've got transfer from ULM, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Notre Dame. Tight end room out of New Mexico State. They've had to hit the portal hard in that receiver room to go along with the quarterbacks that they've been able to get out of the portal.
Yeah, and I think this is where their problem is. Their receiver room was one of their strongest groups a year ago, but Will Shepherd, who is a little bit of a locker room problem now at Colorado. You've got London Humphreys, who was maybe the most talented kid on the team, left for Georgia, again, NIL situation. And I'm not sure he's on the top two in the two deep at Georgia, but he was the most talented kid they had. So that leaves them with Quincy Skinner, who's a fourth-year guy who's got some talent. Junior Sherrill's probably the guy I like it best in that room. He's a slot guy, played as a true freshman, had almost 300 yards receiving and did some nice things. I think scored 3 touchdowns. But they filled out with kind of some transfers. Darian Wiley, who played last year at Louisiana Monroe, caught 400 yards worth of passes. Jeremiah Dillon, who was at Ole Miss, was a consensus 4-star kid out of high school, but didn't play either his first 2 years in Oxford. So we'll see if they can tap into something there. And Loic Fanucci, I think it is, from Texas Tech, who had 6 catches for 85 yards last year. He's going to be a factor in the slot. They also got Micah Bell from Notre Dame, who was a highly rated corner out of high school. He's going to come play in the slot at Vanderbilt. So I don't know what they've got there. I think it's going to be one of the lower ranked receiving rooms in the league. Their running back room was not good a year ago. I think a lot of that may be related to the offensive line. But I would think Sedrick Alexander and A.J. Newberry, both who flashed some things as true freshmen a year ago, but didn't have eye-popping numbers, will be their guys in the backfield to get the lion's share of the carries. And, oh, by the way, tight end room, maybe the strength of the skill positions outside of quarterbacks. Watch for Eli Stowers, who also came in from New Mexico State. He's been at Auburn, 35 catches, 366 yards, a top 200 recruit out of high school, and a kid they've got named Cole Spence, who hasn't played yet because he's been hurt, but he's a big 6'7" tight end who's pretty athletic and can make some plays. It is not a group on the whole that compares favorably, I think, to the rest of the skill guys in the SEC. But the offensive line was also bad a year ago, Chase, and I think they've made some improvements there. Maybe you improve that. That makes everybody around you better. We'll see. I don't think their skill position group is ideal, but I think the line, which I'm sure we'll talk about momentarily, is going to be the X factor in all this.
Yeah, let's talk about that line because you got Gunnar Hansen coming back. You got some transfers on the roster as well. As they've added to that offensive line. But what was their goal? What did they tap into to try to make this thing better for these transfer quarterbacks coming in?
Well, what they did is they went out and got a bunch of experienced offensive linemen. Chase Mitchell from Liberty, a 2020 graduate, is going to come in as their left tackle at 6'4", 330. They added Steven Losoya, who was a starter at Mississippi State. He'll be the center. They got Steven Hubbard, who is a 2018 grad. It's just weird to see some of these graduation years, but he's played a lot of ball at UTEP. Presumably, those will be 3 of their starters. They moved left tackle Gunnar Hansen, who's got a shot to make an NFL roster one day. They moved him inside at guard, and then they'll have a new face, I think, on the right side at tackle in either Mitchell Sandoval or Cooper Starks, potentially, both guys who were 2023 recruits. So they'll have a new guy there. But I think you'll see maybe some guys that got some starts for them last year will be moved to reserve roles. And I think depth is going to be a key for them. That may help them a little bit. So I think it was encouraging if you're Vanderbilt to get 3 guys that played a lot of snaps elsewhere and are pretty old, and maybe being able to move some guys who are better fitted backups to those roles. So I think of all the places they improved on offense, you would think quarterback could be one, but offensive line, they might have gotten even better than they did. We'll wait and see.
Well, and the offense goes a long way to that point. If your offensive line is strong and good, that makes the rest of your offense better. So maybe that's a case we can see that for the Commodores this year.
Well, and that also keeps your quarterbacks healthy because let's face it, quarterback runs are going to be a large part of what they do. I think they want to shorten the game, move the chains, keep their defense off the field, and at least there's a plan in place. Now, whether they can execute at that level, we'll wait and see. But I like the thinking for Clark Lee. I think at Vanderbilt, resources are always a challenge, and you've got to think of ways to win that maybe other teams don't see as much. And I mean, nothing's more of a nightmare than a defensive coordinator when you got everybody covered on 3rd and 8 and a quarterback escapes containment. They got two guys there that can do that. And again, you go back to 2022, that's how they won some games. That's the formula they're trying to recreate.
So let's move over to the defensive side of the ball, Chris, as again, staff changes being made on both sides of the ball. But Clark Lee, we know from his time at Notre Dame, a great defensive coordinator. And so he is taking over the defense. Not only the head coach, he will also serve as the defensive coordinator who run his own defense. And I think this was a good move by Clark Lee.
Yeah, I think it was too. He was one of the most respected defensive coordinators in the country when he was at Notre Dame. Frankly, I think he waited too long to do this. I did not like their old defensive coordinator, Nick Howell. I didn't think he did a very good job. I think having Clark Lee run the defense, since you've got Jerry Kill basically to be the head coach of the offense, that allows him to shed some of his head coaching responsibilities. So I think that'll be interesting. And again, we talked about them getting guys in the portal on offense. You look at the defense, they landed a couple guys in the portal who played a lot of snaps other places. Corday Sidner from Purdue, Zaylen Wood from Middle Tennessee State, which is not far from Vanderbilt's campus. Both those guys have played a good bit of college football. I don't know if they've got any stars on the defensive line, but they've got a lot of depth. You need 9, 10, 11 guys who can play in the SEC. I think that's a starting point. And they got a couple of the transfers on the back end that we'll get to, and also some interesting linebackers, because I do think that there is a little bit more talent on this defense for Vanderbilt than it had a year ago.
And looking at the defensive front, I mean, you mentioned a couple of those guys who've transferred in from Vanderbilt, but just one guy from Purdue, one guy from Middle Tennessee. The rest are kind of Vanderbilt guys. What do you make of this defensive front? Is that going to be a kind of a focal point for the Commodores this year?
Well, again, I don't think I see any stars here maybe, but what I do see is a lot of older guys, a lot of, some class of 2019s. Some class of 2021s, those kind of guys getting old and developing physically. And again, they changed their strength and conditioning coach. So maybe you see an improvement there. Guys to watch, Issa Wataha, it does not spell anything near the way I pronounced it. He's a German import who a lot of analysts out of high school thought could be a star. That's yet to happen, but he's a guy to watch. Demarion Thomas in the middle. Vanderbilt hasn't had a lot of just beefy middle of the line defensive linemen who can compete with other SEC teams over the year. He's one of them. And I think Zaylen Wood, we mentioned him earlier, who probably will play inside for them. He was a pretty good player at MTSU 2 years ago. Spent some time hurt last year. Wasn't quite the same guy. But I just think the strength in numbers up front. Again, not sure there's a star here, but if you can play these guys all 30 snaps, they're better players rested with 30 snaps than maybe 45 or 50. And I think that's part of the gamble they made.
So looking at the rest of the defense, the linebacker core, again, transfer coming in there. Is this a strength of the team? What's the linebacker room look like?
Chase, there's not a lot of places where Vanderbilt's got talent that probably stacks up with the rest of the league. I think linebacker could be an exception. Langston Patterson really kind of came on like a house on fire last year, had 8 tackles for loss, played a lot more down the stretch. He's a guy that if he'd hit the portal, I think a lot of teams would have been on. Prince Collie, who transferred from Notre Dame 2 years ago, didn't play last year. Not sure if that was a health thing or what it was. I'm not sure Vanderbilt has had a guy that's been rated a 5-star recruit by any service in a couple of decades, but he was. On3 rated him as a 5-star kid a couple of years ago out of Notre Dame. So he's a guy that I think there's some feeling that he's going to be a better guy. They've got a little depth behind him. Ryan Longwell, his kid who played as a true freshman a year ago. Bryce Cowan also played a decent amount as a redshirt freshman last year. So I think this is a place where between Patterson and potentially Colley, Vanderbilt might have some guys that they're going to compare favorably, not like with a Georgia or an Alabama, but maybe that next tier down where they can have a room that's pretty good. They really only have two true linebackers. They have a star position, which is kind of that hybrid nickel safety guy. And they got a guy named Brandon Fontenette, who was a consensus 4-star guy for TCU 2 years ago in recruiting. Didn't play a ton at TCU, but I think that's a guy that'll plug in as a starter and be a big factor. And again, an athletic upgrade for Vanderbilt.
And looking at the corners, the safeties, again, a position where you see several transfers coming in, and a safety. I know Dante Carter, high school guy that's coming in, but again, a position they tried to upgrade out of the portal.
Yeah, Carter was a top 150 recruit on a consensus basis by at least by one service's composite rating. You don't see Vanderbilt get a lot of guys in that spot. He's going to be probably the only true freshman starting for them. He early enrolled. They've got another safety, CJ Taylor, arguably the best player on the team. Has been hurt a lot the last couple of years, but if he's healthy, he's a star who can play most places in this league. And I think what they did at corner, Chase, they were just so bad at corner the last 2 years. They got Colby Taylor, who was a part-time starter at Wyoming. He's going to come in. 7 passes defended a year ago. They got 2 guys from FCS schools in Mark Davis and Marlon Jones. Each of those guys had 3 interceptions a year ago. I think both those guys might have a shot to make an NFL roster. Don't know if they're draft picks, but that's a talent upgrade. And they started a kid in Martell Hyde who's a true freshman. Really hard to start as a true freshman in the SEC as a corner. And you've seen a lot of guys that are eventually first-round draft picks that struggled that first year. Height did some things at times for them a year ago. I think that's a bright spot. I think of all the areas on the team, Chase, it feels like through depth, they might have upgraded their secondary maybe more than any other spot. And a lot's going to hinge on that. I think if you're Vanderbilt and Clark Lee, you hope the tandem having a little bit more pass rush, a little more depth up front, takes off the time on the back that you guys have to cover. So again, not a lot of stars here, but just in sheer numbers, they attacked a lot of their problems. And if a couple of these kids pop, the defense has got a chance to take a step up for them.
Yeah, and that would be really good news there for the Commodores. Anything on special teams, Chris, that stands out to you about the Commodores?
Well, they lost a good punter, but they got good one in return. Jesse Mirko from Ohio State. I guess he wasn't happy with not punting enough, which you don't do at Ohio State. He'll probably get more of a chance to do that at Vandy. He's a transfer there. They'll have a new kicker. Presumably that's Brock Taylor. Don't really know who their return guys are going to be. They also lost their special teams coach. That was a loss for them. So this is an area where I think they're going to struggle to be better than they were a year ago.
And Chris, we know it's Vanderbilt. It's a team that traditionally is towards the bottom of the SEC, and no help this year when it comes to schedule. I know we've done their schedule preview video here on the channel, but it's a tough schedule. You got Missouri, Alabama, Texas, Auburn, LSU, Tennessee, and then you got Kentucky in there in South Carolina. And then you start the season off with Virginia Tech. So you'll learn quickly about this team in game 1 against Virginia Tech, but there's no let-ups in this schedule this year for the Commodores.
Yeah, that'll be a hot 11 o'clock kickoff. I think you'll want to be in the press box for that one instead of the stands, and I'll probably be there for that being in Nashville. But yeah, you've got Alabama, Kentucky, middle of the season, followed by Texas after Ball State. I think the key for Vandy, if you can play toe-to-toe with Virginia Tech for a while and maybe sneak a win, that does a lot for your confidence, even if you play them close. I think people want to see signs that this team has gotten better. Chase, they just were non-competitive a year ago against any SEC team. And so I think game 1 might be a little bit of a harbinger to let us know whether Clark Lee made this team a lot better with his changes or not. I think he made them better. The question is, did he make them better enough that it's going to matter?
Right. Does it translate to the field? Like, yeah, we've been going through the roster. We've been talking about these guys, but does that translate to the field? Last year they were ranked 101st in scoring, 122nd in rushing out of the
Yeah.
133 teams, 64th in passing, and then 112th in total offense. But I see where they've looked to improve with the
Yeah.
quarterbacks, with this receiving room. Do you see those numbers going up this year?
Wait and see. I'm not sure that they're good enough on the skill positions, but again, a better offensive line helps a lot. At least there's a plan in place. If you've got something that's hard to prepare for, you see there was service academies all the time. Last thing you want to do is draw an Army or a Navy in November or something like that. Not a lot of SEC schools do that for that reason, but just a little something different to kind of negate the talent advantage. I think that's what you're banking off if you're Vanderbilt. Again, at least there's a strategy there. Look, Chase, this has just been a team without an identity.
Yeah.
Even some bad Vanderbilt teams, they've been good on defense at times. That hasn't happened in a while. They've never been an up-tempo attack where at least like, okay, you're going to play them, but you're going to have to outscore another team. This is just a team that's really lacked a discernible identity. I feel like Clark Lee has at least tried to give them one in the offensive philosophy. And one other thing to note, he said this, we're doing this the day after Clark Lee spoke at Media Day. And he talked about how they had gotten bigger at a lot of positions, a lot of guys adding 10 to 15 pounds on average at different position groups without losing speed. They were bad at the point of attack the last couple of years. That's another thing to look for that I think will help them on defense. If they can be more physical and develop a little bit of an identity, that's going to help them have a chance to win a couple more games than they did a year ago.
Yeah, for sure. And so we'll keep you covered on Vanderbilt football along with the rest of the SEC all season long here on Southeastern 16. Subscribe to our channel, like the video, drop us a comment if you'd like. Also, if you want to sponsor our content here on Southeastern 16, let us know. We'd love to connect with you about that as well. But we've got you covered all season long and getting you ready for the 2024 season here on Southeastern 16. For Chris Lee, I'm Chase Robinson. We'll be back with more football coverage of the SEC here on Southeastern 16.